Hello everybody and welcome back to another Sponge Chat. As you can see, I'm doing something a little differently today. I'm out in the sun. It's quite sunny in Zaragoza, so I thought, you know what, it's a perfect opportunity to get some sun and do my introduction to the Sponge Chat. Now, recently I had the pleasure to sit down and speak with Daniel Jackson, who, for those of you that follow the blog, will know that I reviewed his Cambridge Element some time ago, which is a brilliant overview of task-based language teaching, and you should definitely check it out. Within this Sponge Chat, we did speak about task-based language teaching, funnily enough, and we actually expanded on, or extended, if you will, some of the points that were brought up with my Sponge Chat, or from my Sponge Chat with Martin East, in which we also looked at task-based language teaching. So in this Sponge Chat, we went a little bit further, and we looked at things such as, you know, the role that implicit and explicit learning plays in language learning and within task-based language teaching. We looked at perhaps the rationale for an uppercase or a very strong version of task-based language teaching, and also the positives of something like a task-supported syllabus. Of course, we also looked at some advice. And it was interesting because we looked at some advice for teacher educators looking to implement TBLT in their context. And on the topic of teacher education, we also touched on something that I hadn't really heard about before until I started chatting with Daniel over LinkedIn. And this is this idea of teacher noticing. So how teachers, or what teachers notice in class and how they react to that. So we looked at that and sort of the importance of that, and that was really, really interesting. As usual, we had some brilliant book recommendations, some new ones as well, some books that haven't actually been on the list as of yet. So I hope that you find value in those. And as usual, if you do have any comments about the Sponge Chat or any requests, please leave them in the comments on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and because I do read them, and I'll get back to you. So without further ado, here's the Sponge Chat with Daniel Jackson. Have a great day. Well, I'm here with Daniel Jackson, and first of all, Daniel, just want to say a huge thank you for your time. As I said before, what I can only assume is a very busy schedule. It's when you agreed to this Sponge Chat, I was like, oh yes, got him.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to make time for this. I'm not teaching at the moment. We're in between semesters, so.
Okay, so we chose a good moment then, I suppose.
We did, yeah, we did.
Yeah. Just so that everyone's aware, you're based in Japan, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
In Chiba, Japan, not far from Tokyo.
Okay. My geography with Japan is, I'm not even going to talk about geography of Japan, but
Okay.
in terms of the I mean, I'm in Spain, and at the moment we're just coming out of what's supposed to be spring at the moment. So it's quite, I mean, it's going to be 20 degrees today. In Japan, what's it like there?
Well, it's the beginning of spring. Yeah, it's starting to look more like spring, and the this of course is the beginning of the cherry blossom season, which is, I think many people would say, is the most beautiful time of year in Japan. So yeah.
So everyone should
And
visit now.
they should definitely, please come visit. Yeah. And we're also it's also the time of the year when we begin our school term, so we're looking forward to welcoming the new students in April. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the this is a bit off topic, but when does the academic year start and end in Japan?
Yeah, it starts in April, and then
It
it
actually starts
ends
in
in
April.
this classes end in January. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
really interesting.
mm,
Because in Spain it's quite different.
hmm
Our academic year starts in October, September,
Yeah.
September, October, I should
Hmm.
say, and then ends in June, and then there's a quite a large
Yeah,
summer break.
that's more what I'm used to from the United States. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's how it is there. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've gone off topic already,
Okay.
which which is the normal
Yeah.
theme of sponge chats. Anyway, let's get into the questions that we looked at before. So my first question, well, actually, before we get into the questions, I should probably give the spiel about sponge chats. So sponge chats all started. I don't even remember when they started, but basically with this idea of um someone asked me how I moved into teacher education, basically, and I wanted to explore that question a little bit further, because I came to realize that no matter the career path you take in language teaching, whether it's materials writing, research, for example, in your case, or teaching as well, or teacher education, management, the career path is or the way to get there is often quite different for every person. And so I wanted to show people that there are numerous ways of achieving different goals within language teaching, and hopefully add, you know, keep people in the profession, because we do often lose a lot of people to mainstream education, or worse, they just leave education in general. And so yeah, so these sponge chats have kind of evolved now
Mhm.
into what I call perspectives, and we look at sort of a certain area within EOT, and thankfully I have you here today to look at the perspectives on TBLT, which is going to be great. Something that I'm really really passionate about, and something I know that you're very passionate about.
Yes.
So enough from me. Let's turn over to you. There's always a big question at the start of Spanish Chats, and that's who are you? Who is Daniel?
Okay. Okay, good way to start.
Go.
Okay, I'll tell you. I first began teaching with an organization called Literacy Volunteers of America. And that was after college, and I had gone back to my hometown in New Jersey, and I started tutoring, right,
Mm,
to groups of immigrants to the United States through this organization. So that lasted a little while, and then I decided it was interesting. I enjoyed doing it. I could try to make a career out of it.
mm,
So then I went to the University of Pennsylvania to do my master's in TESOL. And after that, I moved to Japan and started teaching at a university here. And then that was initially an internship for 2 years, but then it turned into 8 years.
wow.
And yeah, sort of unexpectedly. But yeah, I at that time I started getting more interested in research, and I was trying to do research in my classes and within the program that I was working for. So eventually I thought I had better go and do my PhD. And that's when I enrolled in the second language studies department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I moved from Tokyo to Honolulu, and I was there for 5 years working on my PhD. It was a great experience. I was taking classes, teaching classes, doing some editing work. Fortunately, I got a fellowship when I was finishing up my dissertation, so I had plenty of time to write it. Um, and then once I graduated, I moved back to Japan
Mm,
to start teaching at Kanda University of International Studies, which is where I am now.
mm,
And at Kanda, I am, well, I teach mainly undergraduate classes. So I teach a course on English for academic purposes for the first year students. And I also teach courses that are sort of content-based courses. What that actually my TBLT course is one of those courses.
Mm.
And then I also teach sort of more advanced courses on second language acquisition, applied linguistics, and I would maybe call those more like English medium type
Yeah.
courses, right? And those are for the third and fourth year students. So that's all the undergraduate program. And then for the graduate program, I also teach for the MAT SOL program, and I supervise students in that program as well. So that's what I've been doing.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be sometimes, yeah.
It's interesting.
Um,
Obviously, you've compressed quite a few years of work there into, all of about a minute.
well,
Um,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. I guess that's over the span of 20 something years, 25 years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And that's a serious commitment to the industry, the profession, however you'd like to view it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some quite interesting aspects there. Like I'm completing my MA at the moment,
Hmm.
and it was interesting because before I did my MA, I did my Delta, um,
Yeah.
and uh, the Delta was amazing. It was very practical, and it took my
Hmm.
teaching to where it kind of needed to be, and it showed me where I needed to learn more. But the MA I'm
Hmm.
finding is very very interesting from sort of the theoretical underpinnings sort of aspect.
Hmm.
But then you've taken that further and done the PhD. Um, what was that journey like? Because you mentioned
Hmm.
it was 5 years in Hawaii. I mean, being in
Hmm.
Hawaii, first of all, sounds amazing.
It
Um,
is. Yes.
but
Yeah.
that process of carrying out a PhD and something that I haven't actually spoken about with anyone on Spanish Chats, and something I'd like to look at further
Hmm.
because I know there are
Hmm.
people that are interested in that.
Hmm.
How did you decide to do that first of all? And
Hmm.
very briefly, I suppose, what was that process like going through the PhD?
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. I'm trying to think back to where that may have started. Um, well, I mean, like I said, I was doing some research when I first came to Japan at the university where I was teaching.
Mm,
Um, and I guess I felt that I couldn't really, I mean, there were a lot of things that I could do that were maybe innovative or perhaps ambitious. I mean, I had already had some familiarity with TBLT, so I was
mm,
trying to I did a project where I had the students communicate in tasks, but they were doing it through computer mediated communication. So they were
right,
doing it through a chat program. And I was also involved in some sort of assessment projects that use tasks. And this was all sort of part of our curriculum development that I was doing with other people, right? And often I guess I had two or three colleagues at the time who were doing PhDs or who were finished, and I
right,
was working closely with them. So they were definitely an influence on me because I saw them doing it. I thought, well, okay, this is kind of the direction that I'm going.
right.
And
Yeah,
I did realize that there were certain um, limits to what I could do, right, without
a PhD.
further education.
Mm,
And so that was definitely, I think, part of the reason why I decided to do it. And I was still reading at the time. I think I just developed a habit in college and in graduate school of just reading everything I could on second language learning. At the time, I was reading a lot of research in second language acquisition.
yeah,
And I had always been fascinated by the noticing hypothesis, Richard Schmidt's noticing hypothesis. And so that's what helped me sort of decide on Hawaii because he was there. And then I think yeah, I kind of yeah, really gradually. I mean, I was employed full time, so it was actually kind of a big decision to break away from that and
mm,
go and do this new thing that I had no idea whether it was going to succeed or not. Um, and a little bit scary, right? But I gradually got into it because I went to Hawaii for the task-based language teaching conference in 2007.
Mm.
And so I saw the program. I saw what it was like. Beautiful campus, really nice people, great food. Everything was,
Mm.
as I thought, right? And then that kind of gave me more confidence. And then I met people. I started to meet, people in the program and talk to them. And
Yeah.
eventually I was convinced I could do it. And I applied. And I think, I was my I remember one thing I asked my advisor, I sat down, I had an interview with him before I joined the
Mm.
program, and I said, at the end of the interview, I said, "Do you think I should apply?" And he said, "It's not like you have no business applying." So I went ahead and I got in, and yeah, it was,
Brilliant.
yeah.
It sounds like it's obviously a big commitment, like
It
you're,
was for me, it
yeah.
was. And I shouldn't I think it was big for me because I was, like I said, I left a job.
Mm.
And I think I had about a year left on my contract at that stage.
Mm.
But it was also I should say as well, it was the type of contract that they weren't going to renew
Okay.
again. I had
Mm.
already renewed it 3 times, and that was that. So I had to figure out what to do within a year
Right.
or so.
Okay.
Right. And that seemed like the right choice for me.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, so that
Okay.
was that. Um, I would say there are other ways of doing it. I mean, I could have decided to just find another job in Japan and then do the PhD part-time or something like that, which is
Yeah.
what a lot of my friends have done, and I think that's also a very good way to do it.
Mm.
Or I had also other friends who were doing theirs online. Um,
Mm.
and so there are a lot of different options now. I
Different
think
ways. Yeah.
that's worth thinking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if
This
mm,
is definitely something I'll have to explore with others as well. Because I know
sure,
that
yeah,
there are many people that are thinking about that nowadays, and
yeah. Oh
it's
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. I meet a lot of people who are thinking about that, and I do think there are a lot of options now. I think
Mm.
it's quite flexible. You can find a way of doing it that suits you.
Yeah. Now you did mention within the past 5 minutes or so some very interesting points, and hopefully we'll get back to them. But one of the points that does stand out is this idea of your interest within task-based language teaching, which started even before you took on your PhD. So,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
where did where was the spark? Where was that moment where you
Yeah.
thought, okay, task-based language teaching is something that I would like to take further and, well, write books about? and
Yeah.
and and obviously your research, extends all the way back to, I think it's 2013, was that was one of your was one of your first articles that I found.
That was
So
that was one of the first, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it's extended, over a decade now.
Hmm.
So where did the spark come from? Where was that?
Mm,
Where did the interest come from in TBLT?
yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And it it began all the way back in my master's program.
Mm.
Where, I joined that program at the University of Pennsylvania in 1998. And I was there until 2000. And so at that time, I was very fortunate. I got to work with Professor Teresa Pica, who everybody called Terry. And so I was taking classes with her, and I was actually doing some research for her as a research assistant. And she had been doing a lot of, she'd been doing research on tasks for quite some time at that point. And she always brought it up in her classes. She talked about it a lot. Um, she was just I mean, also I think I might not have been so attracted to the idea if I hadn't heard it from her, you know,
Right.
because it's hard to describe her for if you've never met her, if you never got to meet her. She was just an amazing teacher. Just had all the qualities that a teacher that you look for in a great teacher, right? I
Right.
mean, she had charisma. She had this enormous intelligence, but was also very, a lot of humility about things that she didn't, that were new to her. She had a lot of warmth. Everybody says that she always remembered their names, and 10 years later she'll still remember you.
Right.
And I found that to be true, because I had to contact her years after I graduated from the program and ask her for a recommendation. It was just like, oh, how are you? It was totally,
Yeah.
yeah, made that connection very quickly. And then she also, I mean, she had a great sense of humor too, because there's one story that I remember her telling in class, and I don't know, I don't recall all the details exactly, but it was she um was in Japan for I think some research trip or something, and she was introduced to a group of children. And they were, I don't know if it was a family that she knew or maybe
Mm.
students at a school that she visited or something like that, right? So she got introduced to these Japanese children and they said her name, right? This is um, Dr. Pika. And the children were all laughing, right? And they started calling her Pikachu, which is the name of a Pokemon character.
Yes. Yes.
And so she just thought that was really, funny, and she told that to her classes, and it was just, she just was so down to earth, right?
Yeah.
And you never, not never, but it's rare to get that combination where somebody is like an
Mm.
incredible scholar, but also just very, very, very down to earth. And so, yeah, I just think she just made such an impression on me. And her research was, yeah, her research is inspiring. It's still relevant.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Yes. Very
yeah,
much so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the things that I think some of the themes that I still kind of have in mind from her, from reading her work and from taking classes with her are one of the things is that she always talked about tasks as a bridge between second language acquisition research and classroom pedagogy. Like they were a bridge. That was the metaphor, right? That it's both, theoretical and practical. And so that sort of helps with the you know, the research practice divide. It kind of helps to resolve that a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and then another thing was, always negotiation of meaning. Everything was about having, getting students into a context where they would get input, they would have opportunities for output, and they would get feedback. And so that's what tasks do, right? They
Mm.
provide those ingredients for second language acquisition to occur. Another thing that I think is still relevant, and we hear it all the time now, is she did a few projects on, and this is where I got involved. She did some projects on using tasks in content-based classes, or what we would call it, content and language integrated learning now.
Yeah.
But at the time they called it content-based language instruction. And so there was one project where they had it was sort of like a film class, I think,
Mm.
and the students were watching American films and learning about American culture or whatever, and then they would do discussion tasks. So there were a few papers about that. Um, and then, of course, there's the taxonomy that she came up with, which has 5 task types, and you know, it's a very good framework for understanding materials. If you have a textbook and you're looking
Yes.
at it to evaluate the tasks, you could just use that framework. It's a
Mm.
very practical framework. And so when I started writing the my little book on TBLT, I used that in the first section.
Mm.
So,
It's no, I was just going to say that I mean her work is, as we mentioned before, we when we were speaking, that her work is not only still relevant but resonant within
mm,
within
yeah,
linguistics,
yeah.
and applied linguistics and language teaching, and it's great that you had that experience, I think, with her,
Oh yeah,
um
yeah.
and and that sparked your interest within Southwest language teaching. And I'm glad that you brought up with what she said about it's a bridge between SLA and classroom pedagogy, because that's something that I really do believe as well. And
Mm.
I think that, we're going to talk about teacher education later, but
Mm-hmm.
and I do think that by introducing tasks within the class, we can actually try to bring the world of SLA to teachers in a much more friendly way.
Mm.
Dare I say friendly way? In
Yeah, I
in
hope we can. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, because SLA can be scary. You're looking at all these books and the research and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
if it's done in a sort of um a way that's sort of pedagogically grounded, if you will,
right. Yeah,
teachers
I
have a
think
much
that's
better understanding. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what it was like. It was sort of it made it very concrete.
Mm,
Um, to hear it talked about that way. So we're talking about, this they need input, they need opportunities for output, and then the task is what does this, right? And
yeah.
these tasks provide more of this, and it's so it all sort of fit together nicely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of brought this up before when you're talking about it,
Mhm.
but if we sort of segue on now to sort of
Mm.
to TBLT proper,
Okay.
um, what obviously it's very difficult to define TBLT within a few sentences, but how would you perhaps differentiate TBLT from other approaches within language teaching,
Mm.
within modern language teaching anyway?
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good question. And um, before I try to do that, I think it does depend to some extent on the version of TBLT.
Mm,
And so there's these two sort of versions that people talk about, or more really, but task-supported language teaching versus task-based language teaching.
mm,
Um, and and so with task-supported language teaching, you are just sort of adding tasks on, right, to whatever syllabus you're using. So that's probably the most widespread version of it, right? Where
mm,
you might find a textbook and they have a grammatical syllabus, and then they have a skills syllabus next to it, and then they have the
mm.
vocabulary syllabus, and then they have the task syllabus. So it's all of these things combined, right? So that happens a lot, and that is contrasted with um, uppercase task-based
Yes.
language teaching sometimes, right? This is what Mike Long calls it in his book. Um, and that is a bit different because and that is actually easier to distinguish from other forms of language teaching because it's a much more specific thing, right?
Right.
And so in that case, it would be um, I think of it as sort of like a pendulum, right?
Mm,
Where on one end of it you have these extremely meaning focused approaches, and on the other hand you have extremely form focused approaches, and then you have TBLT right in the middle, where it's
mm,
trying to combine meaning, a focus on meaning and a focus on form. So the meaning, really strong meaning focused approaches might be the kind of thing, that is expected in a study abroad program, right?
mm,
Where students are going to study abroad, they're going to some country to learn the language, and the assumption is they're going to pick it up, right? They're going to pick it up from all the daily encounters that they have with the language, right? They're going to soak it up or something, um, because they're focusing on meaning, right? Living their lives in this new environment. Um, and then on the other end, you would get a very a strong emphasis on form would be something like the audiolingual method, right? Where there's a list of grammar points that the teacher is aware of, and they go and teach those points to the students using things like dialogues or drills, right? But the idea is to just follow along with that
mm,
grammatical syllabus and cover those points, right? Um, And the names for these is names for these things that it's, the analytic syllabus is the more meaning focused, and the synthetic syllabus is the more form focused approach, right? Now TBLT is also analytic, which essentially means that the students are expected to analyze the language themselves, analyze the input themselves. And what TBLT does is just try to set up conditions for students to communicate through the language, and then have them pay attention to the language more closely occasionally, right? And
Mm,
that's the focus on form part.
mm,
So originally focus on form was only reactive focus on form, and so that would mean that, for example, the students are talking in a lesson and they're in their groups talking, and the teacher would use recasts or encourage negotiation, where they're asking asking clarification questions and so on.
mm,
Or they can do things like elicitations, right? Or just briefly give metalinguistic feedback, like you should use the past tense there or something. So all of that is the focus on form part, and that's supposed to sort of give TBLT um, the language, give the students the language that's needed. But it's only done when the need arises, right,
mm.
during communication. So that's how I would differentiate them. I think that's how people have differentiated them, like Mike Long
Yeah,
would would have done it that would have has written about it that way.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I like how you're talking about uppercase and lowercase. Long's very in his book.
mhm,
He has some
yeah.
very strong words about lowercase TBLT. But
Well, yeah, yeah.
um,
It's yeah. I think his writing is there's a certain character to his writing
yeah,
that's compelling. Um, and I mean, the takeaway is that TBLT is really a middle ground between extremely meaning focused
mm,
approaches and extremely form focused approaches.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it was interesting because I spoke to Martin East about
Yeah.
about TBLT and his perspectives on it. Because obviously he's quite obviously very prolific within the TBLT world, and
Right. Right. I know. I saw that episode. It was great. Yeah, it was
okay.
great to see
Wow,
Martin.
excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. I've corresponded with him. So
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
but he was kind of the opinion, it may actually be quite difficult for in many contexts to implement if we want to call it uppercase TBLT,
Yeah.
simply because of the numerous factors that come into play,
Hmm. Hmm.
and maybe a more viable option to get TBLT in the door
Hmm.
is the sort of the task supported syllabi, and for managers, for teacher educators to try and push for that first, and then maybe in the future, in the perfect world,
Yeah.
we have that uppercase TBLT.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
what
I
what are
think
your
that's
thoughts?
very well, I think that's very pragmatic. I think that's right.
Mm,
And that's what happens. I mean,
mm,
I guess I would say too, I think in defense of uppercase TBLT, I'll just say this. It's I think the argument is something like if you don't ever try to do the whole,
mm,
you know, fully fledged TBLT program, then we won't know if it works, right?
yeah.
We won't really know if it's truly effective unless we try to do all of these things, right? I think
Mm,
that's kind of the way people in that camp approach it. They say, but fine if you want to just do task supported, but we also have this version of it, and that is
mm,
probably, we're saying this would be the most effective version. So if we're doing something like a methods comparison study, then you want to do a
of
version that's
course.
as uppercase as you can.
Mm,
Um, and then there are some studies I think that show that approach, and a few of them I put in the element
mm, you
in
did.
one of the sections. There have been studies, implementations that are actually very, very thorough.
Mm,
Um, and I think those are worth a look, really. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with Martin that it's much easier to go this route of,
yeah.
introducing tasks as something that teachers can just try out in their class. and it will have benefits no matter, no matter what, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Because it'll get the
Um,
students communicating.
well, I suppose we could perhaps even go a little bit further into the idea of that uppercase TBLT and look at sort of the in terms of how far do we take this idea of basing it
Mm.
on a needs analysis
Mm. Hmm.
and depending on the types of learners that we're working with. So, for
Yeah.
example,
Hmm.
I can definitely see, let's say, Long's version of TBLT, which is very much, for those that are unfamiliar with it, we're basing it on a needs analysis based
Right.
on what they need language to do. So
Hmm.
whether they're working in the tourism industry and they need to be performing certain tasks within the tourism industry.
Hmm.
Um, but if I want to bring task-based language teaching into working into a context that works with, for example, learners in high school. Um,
Right.
their immediate sort of professional needs, academic
Hmm.
needs, we kind of haven't understand, but professional needs, there we don't actually have quite a lot of data on that. How
Yeah.
would what would be your perspective? I know it's a very difficult question
Yeah.
to answer, but
Okay.
what's your perspective on bringing TBLT into that kind of context?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I think that's that does, yeah, that does sort of, you're right. That I, I think there's this sort of I think what it is that when you look at this literature on needs analysis, right? And there are not too many. First of all, I think there aren't enough published task-based needs analyses, right,
Right.
out there. There really are. There are some very good ones, and but I think there need to be a lot more. And I
Mm.
think the ones that we have now are, like you were saying, they are focused on occupational needs or the,
Mm.
vocational needs, or there are some academic ones. And and so there are those ones. But the younger you go, the fewer
Yeah.
task-based needs analyses there are. And if you think about something like very young learners, right? Their needs are not, they do not, first, there's a couple of problems really. Is one, you can't ask them what their needs are
Exactly.
because they can't tell you. So you need some other method. The other issue is that they don't know what job they're going to do. I mean, they may tell you they want to be an astronaut one day, and the next day they want to be,
Mm.
in the Olympics. It's not going to be, you could get some content from that, but you're not going to get your task from
Yeah.
that probably. But I do think there are solutions to this, and I think it just means that we have to think about needs analyses a little bit differently. We have to sort of broaden our understanding of that, and look at other sources. So we can, for young learners, we can look at, there's an enormous literature on childhood development, right?
Yeah.
And so we can think about children's needs, I think, are in terms of just well, okay, if they're attending a school, right, literacy, they have to start to acquire literacy. They have an enormous need for play. Um, Discovery
Mm.
is something that they're always trying, to understand the world and discover it. Socialization, with their friends, with their family members, and then just physical activity. I mean, which is what
Yeah.
they're always doing anyway.
Mm.
So if you looked into that, into those areas, what kinds of tasks would we be able to think of that are that orient to those particular needs, right? For
Mm.
this group of people who are not, who are still um, very young, right? And I think that's the way to think about it, is really put
Yeah.
yourself in that position of the learner and say, okay, so it's not going to be a job. It's going to be, um, how do you build this, you know, this castle out of these blocks, right?
Yeah.
And you give
Yeah.
them that, and you do that in the target language, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's just how people just have to sort of rethink it a little bit. And again, there needs to be more research on it and more publications that really show how people do this. Um, and the challenge is, yeah, you can't really rely on the needs analyses that have been done for adults,
Mm.
for this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's
Mm,
one of the questions that I'm going to ask you now, and perhaps we can deal with it now.
yeah.
Um, Issues are surrounding sort of the implementation of TBLT. For me, as a
Mm,
not only as an sort of a manager, so a director of the studies of predominantly a young learner and teen academy within Spain, but also as a
okay.
teacher educator who works with teachers, and
Hmm.
I'm actively advocating TBLT
Hmm.
within Spain. For example, last weekend I was at a conference and I
Mm,
actually presented on
yeah.
using tasks with young learners.
Great.
Um,
Okay, that's fantastic.
and but one of the issues that always comes up is, well, where are all these tasks for young learners and things like that.
Mm,
So it was great that you
yeah.
expanded on that. But are there any other issues that you see as being
Mm,
um kind of big, I suppose, or hurdles for us to jump over with implementing TBOT? Obviously, it's very context dependent there, and I understand that.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
in general terms, are there any other issues that come to mind?
Yeah, I do think, yeah, I think there are issues. There are plenty of issues, and I like to think of it in terms of the people who are involved, so the learners and the teacher, essentially. There are lots of theoretical issues, of course, but I don't, I'm going to try to just talk about practical and keep it
Yeah.
on keep it focused on the actual uh, individuals involved. So with the young learners, right, we need to have a different kind of needs analysis, and we need to understand them a bit better and or differently because they're just so different. Um, and that's kind of, that's the past 5 years of experience with my daughter at home, right, is
Right.
all sort of I've really come to realize this lately. But also I think there are other issues with adult learners. Um, okay, I could talk about this in a couple of different ways that are very different. One would be the issue of implicit learning, and the other
Yeah.
would be the issue of combining TBLT with critical pedagogy. So what do you want to get into? Which one of those do you want to get into at this
Let's go.
stage?
Let's go. They're both very interesting, and I'm like, oh.
Okay.
Let's go the first one first. The idea of sort of implicit learning, which is, I think,
Okay.
actually it's
Okay.
become it's
Yeah.
kind of a bit of an explosion in the last few years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about this because it does kind of naturally it kind of you can kind of segue into it from child learners because the assumption is that child learners learn implicitly, right?
Mm,
That's how they learn their first language, right?
mm,
And of course, that's actually an assumption, right? There are some people who challenge that and say, their young learners are actually often very explicit about their language needs, and they'll ask you,
mm,
"What does this mean?" And they'll consciously think about the language.
mm,
But very very young children are learning implicitly,
mm,
and that ability is um, well, I mean, there's debate over whether adults actually have that ability, right? To learn without um, awareness, right?
mm,
And without intention.
mm,
Okay. And so they're only using attention to learn when they're learning implicitly. Right. So it's really hard to give an example of this, but I would just say something like you have some feature X, right?
mm,
And that can be a morphological feature or syntactic feature, phonological feature, whatever it is that's in the input, and you're attending to it, okay? But you're not aware of it and you're not trying to learn it, okay? And you pick it up, right? That's implicit learning, right? That's
mm,
sort of, you know, again, it's like the sponge metaphor, right? That we can just soak up these things. And I think if that worked really well for adults, then it would be much easier
mm,
to learn a second language, right? And especially when you're looking at combinations like where there's a big typological difference. English learning Japanese, it's actually very, very challenging, right?
mm,
There's not a lot that I could take to it, right? There's not a lot of knowledge that I had already,
Mm.
when I went and started to learn Japanese that was relevant, right? So my experience has often been it's a very conscious process, right?
Yeah.
Um, I, I'm not getting a lot for free, right? I'm having to really
Mm.
work at it. So this is the thing. I mean, the idea TBLT has been sort of the strong version or the uppercase version of TBLT. It's been argued that this is that um, learners can learn this way
Mm.
because they have an implicit ability, and
Mm.
that's the default mode of learning, right?
Mm.
And so I think that's something that, we definitely need to have more research on. And I've done a study recently on this with a colleague of mine, um, whose name is Yo Mai, and he was a student at Conda. Then he went on. He was doing his PhD at Michigan State University, and now he's graduated and he's teaching at University of Tokyo.
Mm.
So what we did for this study is that we wanted to understand implicit learning a little bit better,
Mm.
and see if it is, if it's actually a factor in adult language learning. So for this study, it was a meta-analytic study. And basically what we did was we just went out and searched the literature for all the studies that we could find on this topic, all the empirical studies that we could find on this topic. And so there were studies that they're done in laboratories. They're not done in classrooms, or they're very highly controlled studies where um, the researchers would give the participants an implicit learning test
Yes.
and then also test them on their second language ability, right? Some specific ability, whether comprehension or production. So we found a bunch of studies that did that, and we were looking at studies that reported a correlation between those two things, right?
Mm.
Um, and so we were expecting to see, a positive correlation. So implicit learning ability positively correlates with second language outcomes. That would mean that adults can learn implicitly, right? So we found, I think, 21 studies on this, and we got the data from the studies, and we used an advanced statistical analyses to come up with a sort of aggregate
Mm.
um, of the relationship, right? An aggregate score for this relationship between implicit learning and second language outcomes. So it's like a correlation, right? You can think of this as a correlation where the range can be from -1 to +1, right? And if it's 0, then that correlation is meaningless. There is no
Mm.
relationship, right? And it turned out in this study that the value of the correlation was 0.13. Okay, very, very small. Um,
Okay.
but but it was assuredly positive. Okay, so
It was positive.
it was positive, and we actually also went a step. We also have a sort of, there's another method you could do to have a confidence interval, right, and show
Right.
that it's definitely in the positive um, range, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a really, I mean, on one hand, we would have wanted it to be stronger. We would have wanted that relationship to be stronger.
Mm.
But on the other hand, it still gives hope that this is working, right? That
Yeah.
adults actually do have some implicit learning ability.
Yeah.
And so I think, when I think of the takeaway for this is, I think it's really that one can say that this is a sort of a given, right?
Mm.
It's a sort of default state that adults can learn languages without much awareness, without intention to do so. And then anything the teacher does is either going to um, is going to, work with that default, or it's going to work against it,
Right.
you know.
Mm.
So I think we have to sort of respect that.
Mm.
And of course, at the same time, I think we need much, much more research on this. Because our
Yeah.
study was it's a pretty small study as far as meta-analytic studies go. Usually there are a lot more primary studies to use, and in this case, we only found it at 20 or so. So
Mm.
I'm hoping that there will be replications of our study, that other people will come along later when there's more research on it and redo
Yeah.
the study and sort of confirm that result. Yeah, but in the meantime, I do think it does give us some reason for optimism. But that's not the only thing. I mean, we also, when we do TBLT, we have a lot of opportunity for explicit learning going on in the pre-task phase, going on in the post-task phase. There's plenty of opportunity for incidental learning, which is also explicit.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to leave room for learners to just learn more naturalistically, according to their own abilities.
I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got millions of questions.
Okay.
But
I'll
no,
try. I'll try my
no,
best to
no.
answer.
But you
Yeah.
you raised some brilliant points. It's quite interesting about what you found, and in fact, I think that's the one of the articles that you sent me quite a while ago.
Yeah, I think I sent that book is coming out actually very soon. Next month, I think it should be out.
Oh wow,
And it's
brilliant.
in, yeah, I'll send you the link. It's in the Cambridge Applied Linguistics series, and
Mm.
the editors are Edward Wen, Peter Skian, and Richard Sparks. And
Okay,
they have a new
well,
book on aptitude, and it's in that book.
brilliant,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'll make sure to put that link in there.
Okay,
It's
great.
very,
Thank
it's
you.
very,
Yeah.
no, definitely. It's very interesting to hear about the idea of implicit learning, and I think that kind of correlates in the sense of anecdotal data, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense, like teacher
Oh, yeah.
experience.
Okay.
Now, I also think there's kind of a
Yeah.
misconception with TBLT generally
Mm-hmm.
that there is no explicit instruction,
Mm,
um,
mm-hmm.
which
Hmm.
which is not true because
Mm.
there is, right, and
Yeah,
that's
there
this
is, I
idea
think.
of whether the idea of reactive focus on form is one element, but then it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
that's an element that kind of diagnoses needs and provides kind of a rationale for perhaps a
Mm-hmm.
post-task explicit focus on something,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that's quite interesting. So does that mean then? I mean, from what your studies have highlighted, does that mean
Mm.
then that this whether it's potentially post-task explicit focus on form
Mm-hmm.
or follow-up explicit focus, that's kind of necessary, right? That gives quite
Mm.
a strong rationale to follow up
Yeah,
with an
yeah, yeah.
explicit focus on form, right?
Yes, I think so. I think I would agree with that because I think there are certain features that i- are very hard to learn sometimes if you're not um uh directed to pay attention to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
I think that's the teacher's role, is to guide attention to certain difficult to learn areas, and that could be through the post task. It can be, yeah, task repetition, and you say, let's try it again and focus on this particular part of the language. So yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant.
Mm.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said, I do think there are some misconceptions with the teacher's role within TBLT. Um,
Right.
often a lot of focus is given to
Hmm.
the task, and task is
Hmm.
central. Obviously, task is
Hmm.
the building blocks of the curricular and what needs to occur in the
Hmm.
lesson. But then the teacher's role, and in
Hmm.
fact, we're gonna talk about teacher noticing in a second. I think this perhaps links quite well with this.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
the role that the teacher actually plays, perhaps we can
Hmm.
explore that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
What is the role of the teacher within a task-based lesson? Is it simply to mediate the task? Is it to is it to
Mm.
facilitate noticing, or is it a sort of a complex building of everything?
Everything. Yeah. Everything. So much. There's so much. It's actually hard. It's really hard, I think, for it's much harder than other methods where you're just, yeah, it is, because you're having to motivate them into the task. You're having to explain the task, model the input, um, and then get people into groups, do all the sort of classroom management things. And then if you're getting ready to prepare for the post-task phase, you have to be monitoring the learners, right,
Mm.
while they're doing the task. I mean, of course, they go and do it on their own, and the teacher can kind of step away from that and save a little energy or whatever. But actually, you still have to be listening carefully and watching to ensure that they're making progress on it, but
Mm.
also to pick up on things that might be giving them difficulty if you're going to focus on those after.
Mm.
So I think all those things are, essential, and that's where teacher noticing comes in, right?
Brilliant. Well, let's explore
Yeah.
that. What is
Okay.
teacher note? I mean, because you sent
That's
me
okay.
your chapter, and I was like, wow,
I
this
know.
is amazing. Why hadn't I heard of this before? Because it makes so much sense. But perhaps you can
Yeah.
give a brief overview of
Yeah.
what it was and how that actually
Yeah.
applies not only to TBLT because it's not only relevant to TBLT, but
Yeah.
perhaps within
Well,
a TBLT context.
yeah, well, it's funny that, it's relevant to all teaching, I think, and it's actually not it's actually coming from outside of the language teaching field,
Right.
because when I first heard of it, it was getting pretty big in the area of math and science education, and it still
Mm.
is, right? With people who train math and science teachers, it's a pretty widely known concept,
Mm.
and particularly in North America, I think. But yeah, it's definitely relevant, and it's the way they've defined it, and I use this definition as well, is that it's attention, um, intention, and decision making in the context of engagement with learners, right?
Mm.
So it's really all of these processes that teachers are. It's kind of a bundling of a lot of these processes that teachers are going through when they're working with their classes closely,
Mm.
right? And I mean, I think we all have those moments, right, when we're teaching and um, everybody in the class is paying attention to this one thing, right?
Mm.
And you get into like this state of like flow that, okay, now we're really learning, right?
Mm.
And that's actually joint attention, right? Is
Mm.
that everybody is jointly attending to one thing. So I think that really underpins a lot of what should happen in TBLT, where, if we're talking about recasts, I mean, you have to be paying attention to the learner to really, to be able to do that. And of course, with any other kind of reactive focus on form, you need it.
Mm.
That really wouldn't exist without teacher noticing, right?
Yeah.
Without a teacher to pay attention to that. Um, and so, yeah, that's the definition of it. That's the relevance of it. Um, and I mean, there's also, the research that I've done on it, and I started doing research on that topic when I was still in Hawaii. And so I did a paper with Min-Young Cho on it, and then I did my book on it, which was data that I collected here at Conda with the pre-service teachers, right?
Mm.
So mostly my research on that has been with pre-service teachers. And what I noticed with the pre-service teachers is that there's actually a lot of variation
Mm.
in how well they notice, right? And typically what we do is we get them into, we get a video of them teaching, and then we ask them to talk about it, right?
Mm.
And then we code that data for noticing instances, right? And what happens is you find that there are some people who are really, really good at noticing,
Mm.
right? They're really paying attention. And they're really trying to interpret what their partner is doing or what their, students are doing. And they're making decisions based on it. They're doing all of those things. And then there are other people who aren't as good at that, right?
Mm.
And so I think it kind of it's really interesting because, it kind of sort of just it sort of upsets that novice expert distinction for me,
Right.
because there are some people who are just starting out and they're really expert noticers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's, of course, there's also literature on how to improve this. And there's a great idea that that comes from that literature that is using video clubs.
Mm.
So you just get a video of your teaching, you bring it into you find time with the other teachers at your school and you have a meeting to watch the video and just talk about what you're noticing, right? So I think that's a really good thing to be doing for in-service teachers, and for yeah, and for pre-service teachers, I think it's important to talk about this as a skill
Mm.
that teachers need to have in almost any contemporary language teaching, because you have to, it's all very reactive now, right? You're always
Yeah.
responding to the students. You're always responding to some aspect of their language use,
Mm.
or their identity, or anything else. You have to be paying attention to students, right? So um yeah, I think it's a really important concept, and I think there should be um more research on it in language education.
Yeah.
Um and I haven't, yeah, I know of a few projects that are going on right now, and I'm hoping there'll be more on that.
But
Because it does seem very practical.
it does. I mean, to without the sort of the research focus, most of us would probably think of it as monitoring, right? The idea of
Yeah.
that you're being aware of what's happening in the class, sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I like how it's reframed as noticing, in the sense that there is
Mm.
there's sort of focused attention. I think that's the
Hmm.
difference here, right? The idea
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there's attention to what's going on and the ability to react appropriately
Hmm. Hmm.
based on what's noticed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's right.
and that's really interesting. Obviously, within TBLT, it becomes extremely important with the idea of focus on form, or
Hmm.
that especially reactive focus on form, or even that
Hmm.
diagnostic, taking into account of what's happening to look at what I'm going to focus on in the post-task phase.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you're right. I before you actually sent it through to me, I'd never heard of that term before, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Well, there's a lot of research on reflective practice, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Mm.
that's become the sort of dominant mode of teacher education, right?
Yes. Mm.
And then there have been calls, for reflective practice to be more data-based, right? That's, one of the sort of criticisms. Um, and my view of that is that, I agree it should be more data-based and it should be more noticing based, right?
Mm.
So I think I'm in favor of reflective practice. I just think it should be based on what teachers are noticing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they, when you have teachers you're training or working with, and you want to have these discussions and reflection. I mean, it's ideally you can go back to their teaching and you can say, okay, this is what was going on. What were you thinking, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and what were you noticing, right?
Mm.
And have a discussion about that. I think that would be really valuable um, as a way of training teachers.
Definitely. That's definitely something that I know. For example, video observation is definitely something that we use in my
Hmm.
context, and we often
Hmm.
bring the videos into the post observation conferences, and we have a
Hmm.
look at elements that happen, and we try to explore that.
Yeah.
But I like the word, that the idea of noticing. What are you noticing in this element? Because
Yeah.
I must admit that when I use these videos, it's more of a, okay, something
Hmm.
happened, and we
Hmm.
both know something happened, so we're going to analyze that event. But perhaps there needs to be more of a, um there's this part of the session or the lesson, and we're going to watch it and see what both of us notice and compare notes.
Mm.
Would
Yeah.
that be the sort of the takeaway for teacher educators for this?
Um, well, I think if there's any difference, it's really about getting into the teacher's head and
Mm.
saying, what was that teacher thinking?
Mm.
And what were the options, right? I mean, if you're
Right.
attending to something and you see a student do something, what is your interpretation of it, first of all, right? And is that correct? Because you could have a class and the student is frowning, right?
Mm.
Is that because they're concentrating, or is it because they're confused, right? What
Mm.
what is it, And so that step of interpreting it is so important to what happens next. Because if you interpret it one way, you're going to do this. If you interpret it the other way, you're going to do
Yeah.
something very different, right? So I think that's what that's where it can be helpful is because you have to sort of understand what the teacher was thinking. And teachers should kind of be accountable to that, right?
Yeah.
In order and that will help them improve, right? That will
Mm.
improve their teaching skills, I think, in the long run.
Yeah.
To be able to sort of understand what's going on in the class and then make your decisions based on it. But of course, you have to do that thousands of times in a lesson, right? It's
Mm.
constantly, you're making all these decisions. And so you also have to sort of think about, how swiftly are you able to make decisions, right? And
Yeah.
what decisions are you making? And are these the right ones? And so there's a lot of questions you can raise based on that sort of that three-part framework where, of course, we want to be paying attention. Are we also paying attention with the learners? And then are we interpreting that, you know, that event
Yeah.
um, accurately, or are we misinterpreting it? And then what are the decisions that follow, right? Yeah, I think all of that is a good kind of gives you some kind of guideline to go by when you're looking at videos of teachers,
Yeah.
especially if they were the ones they are doing it. And they can tell you something about that, they can recall something.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah.
Well, it seems like time is just flying by, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
skip through to
Okay.
I want to
Uh,
go back to one of the other points. You mentioned that there was potentially an issue with TBO2 focused on critical pedagogy.
yeah, that's one that I was just reading. I think I might have told you about. I wanted to have books. I'm always reading, right? And I have this.
Mm.
I've been reading this fantastic book by
That's it.
Jeff Jordan and Mike Long,
Mm.
English language teaching now and how it could be.
Yes.
And it's an eye opener. It's such a great book, so well
Mm.
written, and I didn't get a copy until after I finished my element on TBLT, and so
Mm.
I I've been learning some new things.
Mm.
Um, which is always, it's always exciting. And one of the things they said was actually, because at the end of my book, I kind of um, made this argument that TBLT should be combined with critical pedagogy, and
Mm.
I still think that's the right way to go, and we need that now. But what they said in their book was really interesting because they said that their version of TBLT is basically consistent with critical pedagogy, except for one thing, right? And it's that in critical pedagogy, learners are supposed to produce the materials,
Mm.
right? But TBLT has all of these detailed procedures for generating materials from a needs analysis and then sequencing those according to, you go from simple to complex tasks and so on. So there's already a detailed sort of set
Mm.
of ideas for developing materials in that version of TBLT. But I wanted to, I was thinking about how do you reconcile this, right? I mean, how do you say we're still going to give the learner um, some freedom to make decisions about materials, right? And how can you do that? And I think there's been good research recently on learner-generated content in tasks, where that basically they're given a sort of the general idea of the task, and they're told, okay, now you create some content and share it with your group or whatever. And
Yeah.
that is actually the studies that have been done on that are saying that is actually very engaging.
Mm.
So I think there's good reasons to do that for sure. And then there are some other ideas about that. I mean, I've I have a colleague who I was teaching with here, Tim Murphy, who has had his students do what he called pro-social tasks, and basically he got them to teach something to somebody else, right?
Mm.
Like the assumption is that you're helping that person by teaching them something, and it's also helping you because teaching is a form of learning, right?
Yes. Mm.
So he's gotten students doing that, and again they create the content for that. They can find a song and sing it to somebody, a friend or whatever, and that's what they do. Um, and so I think there's lots of ways to do this that we can get students involved in the materials,
Yeah.
and creating the materials and bringing in their own content. And of course, that's what happens if you have students if you're doing writing at all, they're creating their own text. which they can then share with their classmates or give a presentation on it. So it does seem like a problem, but it's an issue, but it's really not if you kind of think about it from a teacher's point of view, where
Yeah.
we are kind of always working with what the students produce in class.
Yeah. Um, I'll add one point to that. I think
Hmm.
the idea of materials creation for tasks, and
Hmm.
Jeff and Mike, Jeff especially, he touches on this quite a lot.
Mm.
The idea that it shouldn't be up to the teachers. The kind
Mm.
of
Hmm.
it's managers or curriculum designers that have this
Yeah.
information that they have for the course. They're the ones that should be providing it, because obviously teachers are there to implement
Mm.
them. Obviously
Mm.
they should get input from teachers. And it's interesting because
Yeah.
in next year, in our
Hmm.
academy, we're looking to implement a task supported syllabus.
Hmm.
So we've brainstormed all
Good.
the tasks that we like, and
Yeah,
it's
that's great.
it's our step to move towards sort of a kind of a pedagogy that we really believe in.
Right.
And
Okay, good.
but we've recognized that, for us,
Mhm.
we need to create those tasks for the teachers, but we would
Mm.
like them to make them their own as well. And so
Mm. Hmm.
I can see the sort of the mix between the idea of that it's not involving learners, but it can involve learners as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think perhaps that allowing teachers to work with that learner generated content in a way, or perhaps even
Hmm.
encouraging it, is perhaps
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right step.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
It's just
I think all of these, the teachers want to be able to have some autonomy, right? And the learners as well. I mean, and if they're mature learners, they're going to want to do that, right? Um, and they're, so if they're ready for it and they want to do it, then it shouldn't be, always, okay, we did it for you, so don't. So I think a good idea for that is to sort of set up a bank of materials that everybody can just access and modify,
yeah,
put the files so that you can modify them. And there are a couple of really good um, repositories that have these kinds of materials already that are on. You can find them through the International Association for TBLT website.
mm.
Um, so maybe you can put up that link and
No,
for
yeah, yeah,
homework, people can
yeah,
check out
definitely.
the task bank and the task corner. But yeah, I mean, I think materials that's how, in my experience, that's always how it's been. I mean, people share materials, they modify them all the time.
Yeah,
When you have these programs where you're using in-house materials, people always love to change them and will want to put up their materials and share their materials too.
yeah.
Um, so good luck. That sounds like a really great project at your school. Yeah.
It's a big project.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's quite interesting that you mentioned Jeff. I'm gonna see Jeff he's gonna be presenting at a conference here quite soon. I'm gonna go see him, and
Great.
we've communicated online a few times, but I'm looking forward to
Okay.
having a discussion. Hopefully I can get him on for a sponge chat one day.
Oh, that would be
Um,
great. Yeah. I would
yeah,
love to see that. Yeah.
but he talks about the EOT Hydra, which is the idea, course book driven method, or course book driven EOT. And
Hmm.
obviously, we're a language academy in Spain, and we use course books as well, but we're trying to sort of bring in the tasks as well. So anyway,
Right. Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
write up about my experiences after we've gone through with it. So expect something in the next year or two.
Yeah. I hope you do. I would love to read it and present it at the TBLT conference.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I would love to get there, but it's just getting there. Often it's in places where it's a long way away. So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, well, it's been in different places. It's
yeah,
moving around a lot now. And so, yeah, yeah, I hope it'll be back in Spain.
yeah, definitely.
Um,
But that would be
yeah.
lovely.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to. Yeah, they did have it there in Barcelona a few years ago, and I didn't
Mm.
make it to that one, but yeah, I heard it was very good and yeah,
Um,
great city.
okay, just sort of segueing towards the end, I have one question before we get into
Hmm.
book recommendations. Um, are there any recommendations from yourself or implications from research or what we know about TBLT, implications for teacher educators or for managers looking to work with tasks in their organizations or with teachers?
Mm.
What would be one or two implications or recommendations for them?
Okay. Um, yeah, for the teacher educators, um, okay, so I would just base it on what I've been doing in my own class on TBLT. I think the best thing is to sort of practice what you preach,
Mm,
try to introduce TBLT. Of course, teachers need knowledge about it, but they also need the skills to do it, and they need the confidence that it's going to be worth it, right, to do this. And so what I like to have my students do is when we get toward the end of the semester, we have a sort of final project that involves 4 tasks. One is writing a lesson plan, writing a task-based lesson plan. And then the other is a teaching demonstration, which they do, and then we video record that. And then they do an observation of the lesson, a focused observation. So they talk with a partner and decide the focus,
mm,
the evidence that they're going to look for, and the purpose of the observation. And then I have them go and look at the videos. I put them up, on the course website and have them watch their video of their teaching and watch another person's demonstration so they can talk about them. They come back in the class and we have a sort of debriefing where they discuss, and then they do a written report of that debriefing. That's the final sort of activity for that, or task for that
mm.
that sequence of tasks. So I think that's worked pretty well for me. I've done that a few times now. Of course, when the pandemic came, it had to be modified. So I was, then everybody was at home, so they did sort of how-to videos.
Yeah.
And that was actually there were some great videos. I mean, they put up a video of how do you make these macadamia nut pancakes, or how do you take care of a pet bird, or and then they just had a discussion in Zoom about okay, what did you learn, and what how do you do the task, and do you understand? So you can do it in all different ways, but I do think that having people design tasks is a good way to and teach them and reflect on them is a good way to help teachers understand TBLT. Um, and for the other group, I think the managers, I mean, I think it's just give it a try.
Mm,
There's no harm in starting small, of course. You can see where it goes. You can find lesson plans, you can find task materials. You can look for textbooks. There are a few that are really task-based and might work, and you know, you could try those out. And I think also having workshops on it. I think having, a professional development day and,
yeah.
having them focus on task-based language teaching is a good idea. So all of those things.
No, brilliant, excellent. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, one of the things that people should always be doing is reading, because reading is good.
Yes. Yes.
And no, this is probably one of my favorite parts of Spanish Chat. So we get to look at book recommendations or article
Okay.
recommendations or
Yeah.
resources that you would recommend for anyone that's looking to take their knowledge of TBOT a little bit further. Obviously, the first one that I'm going to recommend is Your
Hmm.
Element. Um,
Oh, thank you.
and there it
Okay.
is there.
All right.
Which is for those that haven't read it, it's a very short read. um but
Yes,
many TBLT books are long reads.
I know.
And so this is this is
Yeah.
quite refreshing. I did say in my review that potentially it's probably not the first thing that people should read, but I was reading it
Yeah.
again, and
Yeah. I see.
at least the first two sections are
Hmm.
actually quite good introductions. Um, and so
Okay.
I
Yeah.
would
Thank
definitely
you.
put that on the reading list for those
Great.
looking to take it
Yeah.
further. Well, what
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah. Okay, well, I would say, yeah, I mean, of course, this book by Jordan and Long, I think that is excellent. It covers second language acquisition in the first
Mm,
part, and then it goes on to talk about issues in the ELT industry, And it does bring up TBLT a lot, and it just talks about some issues that I think are really everybody's thinking about now. I mean, things like teacher precarity, um, and they just have such, just really solid opinions about that and good
Mm.
advice. So that book, and also, I always was going to hesitate because it's only out in hardcover now, but it's coming out. I saw on the publisher's website that it's coming out in paperback this year. So I think that, yeah, get a get a copy from the library if you can, or it'll be
Yeah.
out in paperback soon. So that one, for sure. And then the aptitude book, if people are interested in knowing more about aptitude and implicit learning, and that, as a way that it's one of the rationales, um, for task-based language teaching, that learners have this ability to just um, acquire languages naturalistically without much.
When's
Um,
that coming out? Sorry.
that one's coming out April, I think, this
April.
year. So yeah, there's a link. There's already a web page for it.
Oh, brilliant.
Cambridge has a web page set up that I can send you the link.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Um, okay.
Excellent.
So those are a couple of great books, and I guess I don't know if there's anything else I mentioned that well, the TBLT website I think now has a great section where they have resources that are projects that people are doing. And there are two different ones. I was just looking at, let me just see. Um oh, anyway, it's one of them is called Task Bank. And the other one is called Task Corner. And I've just been browsing these. There are links to them on the IATBLT website. And they're just anybody can upload tasks, anybody can download the tasks there, and they have different languages and different proficiency levels, and a lot of interesting material there. So definitely check those out. Um, yeah, and
Yeah,
so
that's.
that's
I mean,
that's about
there's a
it.
lot
Yeah.
there for people
That's
to
a good start, isn't it?
read.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think if
Yeah,
you
definitely.
wanted to get a start on it, that would be those would be good to look at. Yeah.
No, definitely. I've got a digital copy of Jordan and Long's book, and I've read I think I've read maybe 3 chapters of it. I'm
Hmm.
focusing on my MA stuff at the moment, so it's definitely on my list to
Mm.
finish after. It's
Yeah.
in true Long and Jordan style. It's it's a
Yeah.
very strongly written book, but very
Yeah.
very informative for the parts that I've read so far, and I'm looking forward to finishing that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
thought it was well written and very well researched, and yeah,
Yeah,
worth it.
definitely
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have normally these go for 45 minutes, and we've been speaking for
Oh
over an
my.
hour.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but
Sorry about that. I
but
was probably a bit long-winded, and yeah,
no apologies needed. It was
rambling a bit.
no, but it was very very informative. So Daniel, just want to say
Okay.
a huge thank you for today. And I
Thank
do
you.
look
Yeah.
forward to meeting in person and perhaps at a conference one day.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Yeah, I hope we can meet up sometime, and good luck with your 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 project at your school and your MA and everything else, and with this podcast. Yeah. The
Brilliant,
sponge chats. So thank you again for the opportunity. Yeah.
brilliant, excellent. All right, take care, Daniel.